Hey guys, so this topic is a little bit heavy, but I can't stop caring about discrimination, so let's do this. On February 12th, a Japanese writer published a very shocking column in a conservative newspaper in Japan. She wrote, "Ever since I learned of the situation in the Republic of South Africa some 20 or 30 years ago, I have been convinced that it is best for the races to live apart from each other, as was the case for whites, Asians, and black in that country." Did she just approve of apartheid? Fortunately, her column was heavily criticized in Japan, but I can't help asking those questions. Which part of her brain thinks it's okay to approve of apartheid? Why on earth did the newspaper think it was acceptable to publish her article in the first place? Well, unfortunately, this is a very good example of the fundamental lack of racial awareness in Japan. If you were educated in the West, you will have developed this kind of racial consciousness. There is a voice in your head that asks you, if I say that, am I racist? And you constantly self-monitor and correct your racist thoughts. Because we are all human and we can't help categorizing people sometimes. And sometimes you say, I'm not a racist, but... and go ahead and say something totally racist. But the point is, the awareness is always there. However, in Japan, this kind of awareness doesn't quite exist. So that's why people can freely air their racist thoughts because they don't self-monitor and correct themselves. Sure, Japanese people learn history, stuff like slavery, the Holocaust, and apartheid, but many of them fail to connect the history to their own lives, so they tend to think it's someone else's problem rather than our own problem as humanity. The thing is, the concept of race is somewhat distant for many Japanese people. 98.5% of Japan is considered ethnically Japanese, and of the remaining 1.5%, the majority are Asians. So if you spend your entire life in Japan, which many Japanese people do, you never think of your race. In fact, those who go to Western countries to study are often surprised that people call them Asians. For the first time in their lives, they are aware of their own race, which, by the way, is often considered a social construct, but that's another story. If you remember this YouTuber called Medama Sensei, he asked his Japanese students if they thought there was racial discrimination in Japan, and they said no, and they thought it only happened in the States. What happened was, Medama Sensei emphasized the word racial, and the student immediately thought it didn't relate to Japan because they weren't used to thinking of people in terms of race. And of course, on February 12th, a Japanese musician tweeted a photo of his group with blacked up faces, which I think is absolutely unacceptable. But at the same time, their intention was not to discriminate against black people. They were just completely oblivious to the history of racial discrimination in the States. Personally, I think they really should learn it, especially as their music is often inspired by African American music. Many people say that Japanese people are xenophobic, and that's not completely baseless, but that's not accurate either, because the very same people can easily be xenophiles. So, if you are sensitive to negative stimulus, you will tend to say, oh, Japanese people are so xenophobic, they're terrible. And if you are sensitive to positive stimulus, you will tend to say, wow, Japanese people are super polite and kind. But then again, they are just two sides of the same coin. The real problem here is many Japanese people over-differentiate non-Japanese people. They think people outside Japan are more different than they actually are. Mind you, the majority of Japanese people don't hate people outside Japan. They sometimes might appear to, but in the Japanese context, that is often not their intention. It's just mostly lack of awareness. However, I think Japan really needs to understand racial discrimination as their own problem rather than somebody else's problem, because racism can exist, does exist, and probably will exist in Japan. Some people say, oh, that's just imposing Western values on Japan. Japan has its own way. Sure, many people can be quite Western-centric, but for this particular problem, I think there's a lot we should learn from Western nations given their tremendous effort in dealing with it. And I believe that the majority of Japanese people want to live in a society where different people can live together peacefully and harmoniously. By the way, if you're planning to travel to Japan, you shouldn't be worried. The level of discrimination here is nowhere near the level where tourists would have to worry. Alright, what do you guys think? I know this is a very hot topic, so please let me know in the comment section. Alright, so if you are a foreign national in Japan, Japanese Ministry of Justice has a hotline about human rights issues. The link is in the description. There is also a petition urging Fuji TV not to air blacked up faced musicians, and again the link is in the description. So Sandro says, are only Westerners, Caucasians or Africans called Gaijin in Japan? Mixed Japanese are called Hafu, right? How do Japanese people used to call mixed Taiwanese Portuguese? And that's an interesting point, because technically you can call everybody who is not Japanese Gaijin, but in real life, people use the word Gaijin mainly for Western people. And sometimes the Japanese people called mixed Japanese people Gaijin by mistake, which can be kind of offensive because they are Japanese. And as for Taiwanese Portuguese person, if you look quite East Asian in a Japanese way, people probably wouldn't call you a Gaijin, but if you look more like, I don't know, white or black, you are more likely to be called Gaijin. And that's why Mia's question is interesting. She says, Filipina girls are not Gaijin? Wait, I'm actually for Japanese on paper. So technically, Filipino people can be called Gaijin. But then again, white and black people are more likely to be called Gaijin. I don't really like that kind of hierarchy. And if you are an Asian and don't look Japanese, people might call you an Asian. So it's kind of complicated, but in her case, based on her appearance, I don't think people call her Gaijin because if she didn't tell people she's Filipina, I think people would just think she's Japanese. So this word has a lot of problems. And Maiva says, well, the word Gaijin doesn't sound very offensive to me because many Japanese people I know use it just as the official translation, foreigner, without any discriminatory intentions behind it. Yeah, you can also use the word Gaijin in a very technical way, and in that particular case, it might not be that offensive. But again, like many people use it in a more problematic way because it's a strong distinction. Some people actually don't mind being called Gaijin or call themselves Gaijin, and in a way, it can make you feel kind of special because Japanese people can be super duper nice with quote Gaijin end quotes. And I can kind of relate to that because like sometimes being a foreigner in a foreign country doesn't feel that bad at all because you feel you are different and kind of original. So if you are still listening, you might enjoy my podcast. You can listen to it on YouTube and the link is in the description. Or you can just click the speech bubble above. And well, this video was kind of like an opinion video, but I have been kind of angry about Asako Osono's the apartheid column. I don't know why, but like racial discrimination really bothers me personally. And I'm not always the kind of like person who cares about like justice or doing right things all the time. But it seems like I have some like there are some topics I deeply care about, and racism is one of them. How about you guys? Is there something like you guys just can't help caring about? And yeah, I know that some people like when somebody says bad things about their favorite musicians, they're kind of like they get very angry and that kind of stuff. So like yeah, let me know what you care about. Alright, I think that's it for today and see you guys later. Ciao ciao, and make sure that you subscribe to this channel.